So it turns out that Biden can say the T word.
From iconic companies like GM and Ford building out new electric vehicle production to Tesla, our nation's largest electric vehicle manufacturer.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
He did it! It's all over. Can we now move on, please? Welcome to podcast 1369. Coming up today, we will talk about the President of the USA finally acknowledging the world's biggest EV maker. Yes, that would be Tesla. Also today, we're going to talk about the possibility that VW could be restricting electric car sales to only the dealers that sell the most combustion cars. All right. Let's dig into that one. There's a bit of exclusive reporting by CNBC to do with a change to the specification of the Chinese cars from Tesla, which means they are not compatible anymore with a kind of a ROBOTAXI full self-driving future. Not a big deal for the drivers, but just according to how some people are valuing the company. We'll talk about some robotaxis coming out of China that they say are level 4 ready using plug-in hybrids. 1,000 of those coming out of the factory using a combination of LiDAR, radar, cameras and more sensors as well. And why Europe's power grid can support over 100 million EVs right now. And if we want to do more, things like smart charging and being clever about when we charge EVs will be required. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening in the world or watching. Welcome to EV News Daily. It's Wednesday, 9th of February. My name is Martin Lee, and I've been through every EV story so you don't have to. All right, we'll kick off with that headline story today. Slightly tongue-in-cheek, I know. I find the whole thing rather ridiculous. President Biden finally acknowledging Tesla. And the US president, for some people, they think that's the first time he said the word Tesla in a US electric vehicle manufacturing speech yesterday, after Elon Musk had repeatedly complained about being ignored. You know, sometimes old Musky boy's got a really thin skin for being the richest man on the planet and for building an incredible company. Sometimes, I don't know, just does he need a hug from daddy more often? I'm not sure. But anyway, he does like to have a good old whinge about things if he feels like he's not being treated fairly. I mean, come on now, have some self-esteem. You're okay, Mr. Musk. Things are fine with the world, surely. However, he was unhappy that Biden hadn't given him, I don't know, some external validation. I thought the whole situation was ridiculous. Of course, the president, by now, should have said the word Tesla. Instead, he was promoting the likes of Ford and General Motors, which is a fine thing to do, by the way. And of course, they are unionized, using American unionized labor car makers. But the idea that he wouldn't say Tesla because they don't use unionized labor? Well, that's ridiculous. Or is it because he feels that Elon Musk, I don't know, is politically aligned to Donald Trump? Of course, Elon Musk was an advisor to Trump, which many people forget. That didn't last too long, by the way. But, you know, Elon Musk, apart from tweeting, I don't want to get involved in politics, it's clear his politics are more Trump than Biden. But isn't that as an observer of American politics, isn't that Biden's meant to be his forte, like reaching out across the aisle and forming partnerships? So, you know, whatever your politics are, you can't afford not to at least recognize the US's number one EV maker, rather than say things like GM has electrified or Mary Barra has electrified the American auto industry. Blatantly nonsense, but whatever the reasons for doing that, he should have by now recognized Tesla. Elon Musk as well has been pretty spiky on social media. Of course, the reason he has such a big fan base as well, like the Tesla bros love him. He's like, yeah, you stick it to the man, Elon. The whole thing was stupid and ridiculous and blown out of all proportions. And both sides, I think, were probably in the wrong. Can we just all move on? Now, actually, I had one of my listeners email me to say, no, it's not ridiculous. And I do feel strongly about this because he voted for a president and drives a car from Tesla. And he wants those two things in his life to come together. And he wants the president to acknowledge what an amazing job they've done. And it's to anyone with even, you know, a fraction of knowledge of the EV industry, it's so clear we wouldn't be where we are without Tesla, without that first Roadster, without Model S. And so very, very strange for politicians to kind of ignore that company. You know, the way that politicians have a bit of a love-in with tech companies, you know, etc. So all very strange. I would love to move on from this. I mean, maybe you do think it's a serious matter, maybe you don't, but either way, it's happened now, and yeah, they're probably not going to send Christmas cards to each other, but that's the point of business and politics and life. We have to get on with people who we see things differently. I'm sure that there's loads of viewers and listeners to this podcast that are different to me. Regular listeners of the last 1,300 shows will know my politics are probably leaning a little more to the left, more towards things like unionized labour and the power of collective bargaining. But I wouldn't die for it. It's kind of the way I lean, but I'm open to other arguments. I want to learn from other people as well. So, hey, more adults in the room needed sometimes, regardless of age. Let's move on. And let's talk about VW considering EV quotas for dealership. This is a really interesting story. It's coming out of the industry site, ELECTREK.com, who say that VW Group is reportedly reducing the ordering possibilities of its dealers and introducing a quota system for sales partners. Accordingly, larger dealers would get to order more EVs. So how will it work? Well, according to the dealers that supplied this information to the story, which came out of a German publication, customers are waiting around 12 months for an ID3, and I can confirm that. I'm not an ID3 order, but I've spoken to listeners of this podcast. One of them should have had it's a friend of a friend, said that he should have had his car last December, and it was going to be now April, now it's September for an ID3, and he's had to buy an interim car. And so I'm hearing these stories about delays to the ID3. Is it a chip shortage? Is it part shortage? Is it batteries? We don't know, but Volkswagen itself speaks of a delivery period of more than 9 months for the ID cars. The situation is similar for the Audi Q4 e-tron. Those who order now get the vehicle mid-2023. Seriously. And according to the manufacturer, they'll be waiting at least around 12 months, according to ELECTRIVE.com. In other words, large dealers can order more of the electric cars than small dealers. So, let me give you some numbers that ELECTRIVE had. If you sell 999 vehicles for VW, you get to order 15 ID3s and 25 ID4s. Now, I've not seen a response from VW. If I see it, and they reply, we'll of course give that to you on this podcast about what they have to say about it. But if I'm not reverse engineering this story the wrong way, correct me if I'm wrong, please. Those who sell more combustion cars get to sell more EVs. Combustion cars are less in demand than EVs. Everybody wants an electric car at the moment. So dealers want to sell electric cars. So in order to get the cars that people want, they have to sell more of the cars that people don't want. That means, potentially, and I may be wrong, people walking into dealerships wanting an electric car. The dealers knowing they're a year away and saying, no. My friend, have you met Diesel? Oh, Dave Diesel. This is a lovely car. I hope that wouldn't happen. I really hope that wouldn't happen. But what's the alternative? If you want to get the electric cars, you got to sell the combustion. Well, we'll wait and see what VW say, and I'll give you their reply on tomorrow's show, if they do. Next, this from the Department of Bleeding Obvious. Latest news, breaking. Tomorrow morning, the sun will rise, says Ford's CEO Jim Farley. He didn't say that, by the way, but he did say that with the F-150 Lightning, he said, if we had full production today to meet our current demand, we would rival the Model Y as the leading BEV nameplate. All right. Not just me, is it, with this one? If they had production capacity to meet the demand they've got for an electric truck, they'd sell more of them than the Model Y. Hey, it's a potential. I've been saying for the last 1,369 episodes, EVs aren't so bad, If only Ford, years ago, had ramped up their EV production, battery supply, engineering nous, all of them, they would potentially be selling more F-150s now than the Model Y, but they're not, because they haven't set up the production. It's like saying, if I had £1 million, I'd be a millionaire. Anyway, I liked Fred at ELECTREK's response to this. He says, it's kind of wild for people who've been following closely for a long time. Ford is basically saying, we'd be selling as many EVs as Tesla if we were producing as many EVs as Tesla. And I think he's right, says ELECTREK. Ford could sell as many F-150 Lightnings as Tesla sells Model Ys. In the US, at least, truck culture is so big right now, but they're not competing vehicles. Actually, they're a small SUV and a pickup truck, so maybe we'd have a massive EV market if only Ford had invested years ago and not banged the drum for hybrids, electrification. I hate that word so much, electrified. Oh, I hate electrified. It just means something shabby when you see that word. Anyway, moving on. Tesla have cut a steering component to deal with a chip shortage. This is some original reporting by CNBC. And yes, it's not lost on me that Elon Musk tweeted recently about his dislike for traditional media. And it's easy to agree with him, right? Because it seems easy to say, well, yeah, we don't like the traditional stuff. We want this kind of new influencer thing. That's cool, right? Because everyone gets to live in their little bubbles and you just follow the people that agree with you. Back to our first story about it's hard sometimes to have, relationships with people who think very differently. But this is why we need good journalism, good original reporting. That's the point of great journalism. It's not what I'm doing. I'm aggregating the news and giving it to you in a podcast. It's not what I'm doing. I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. This is about holding power to account and holding companies to account when they don't want people to know things that affects them. CNBC writes, under pressure to hit fourth quarter sales goals while coping with widespread semiconductor shortages, Tesla decided to remove one of two electronic control units normally included in the steering rack of made-in-China Model 3s and Model Ys, according to two employees and internal correspondence, which was shown to CNBC. Tesla didn't disclose the exclusion, which has already affected thousands of vehicles now leaving China and exporting around the world to Germany, the UK, and parts of Europe. It means Tesla can't turn all of its existing cars into driverless vehicles, says CNBC. Elon Musk has been promising for a long time that a mere software update will turn these cars into full self-driving cars. This one event, if it's true, and of course Tesla haven't commented because they rely on their CEO on Twitter to make a comment about anything, but if this story is true, it means those cars cannot be self-driving cars. Elon Musk says, my personal guess is that we'll achieve full self-driving this year at a safety level significantly greater than a person. So the cars in the fleet essentially become self-driving via software update. I think might end up being the biggest increase in asset value of any asset class in history, blah, 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 pump, pump, pump. Now, that can't happen with these cars. And again, as is often the case, is it just me? Am I missing something with this story? I'm not sure it's a very big deal. Obviously, some people who want to blow it up into a big deal can blow it up, and other people say, hey, don't worry about it, don't criticize Tesla. But somewhere along the middle of that, it's not a safety issue. The cars are not unsafe to drive. It just means that there's that the chip that provides redundancy that allows the cars to be self-driving one day, which they ever will, by the way, but full self-driving. They need this part in order to have that backup system in place. But I don't think those cars ever will, just with a few cameras scattered around. They won't be truly self-driving like we see the best autonomy out there. But I'm not going down that road right now, so it's not really a big deal. It's if you believe that by the end of the year there's going to be thousands, a million robotaxis all around the world with, Teslas driving themselves places while you're asleep, clearly that's not going to happen. But so this is not a big deal anyway. The specific item omitted is an ECU, electronic control unit, in the power steering, which translates the steering wheel movements into wheel turns on the street. And Tesla removed it, says CNBC, because engineers deemed it redundant, primarily installed as a backup. Omitting the control unit will save Tesla money in the near term, as long as no problems arise as a result of the altered system. Yeah, but what if Tesla put that back into the cars today or tomorrow? Then they've got maybe 10,000 cars in the world that don't have this. They've just got to recall them. If you want your full self-driving one day, maybe, you take your car back, they have the chip put in, and off you go, right? And they'll do it. Tesla done free upgrades before. So there's that option. Somebody comes out to your house, puts the chip in, or the control board, and off you go. So, if it were millions of cars, then clearly it's not going to happen. If it's tens of thousands of cars, they could do a recall and get those chips back in. I mean, heck, look, lumbar support deleted. Cars were turning up without USB chargers because there were no chips. And so this is hardly the worst thing in the world, really, is it? CNBC says most of the cars with a single control unit were going to China. Well, look, yeah, in China, full self-driving has a take rate of below 1%, or just over 1%. It's not properly reported. So, hey, if 1% of those 10,000 cars one day want to get full self-driving, just bring them back and put the part in. Anyway, big uproar today, as is always the case with Tesla. There's always somebody with, an extreme opinion of either it's the worst thing in the world or it doesn't matter at all. Well, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't, but hey, There's probably normally a middle ground somewhere. Tesla Model Y coming out of China has had a spec update, of course, with its LFP battery. The standard range Model Y has its performance capabilities changed on the online. I don't think there's any huge engineering changes that have happened here. I think it's just maybe a change of the test procedure. How that's done, and of course the LFP cells as well mean that there's less performance in those cars. 0 to 60 time, 0 to 100 Ks is now showing as 6.9 seconds, not 5.4. We don't get that car here anyway, so I can't compare what the UK configure, the design studio always said. Model 3 already had its performance reduction last year, but that was only half a second. The 0 to 60 time went up by, and the 62 kilowatt hour battery. But look, a Model Y standard range, as it's now called, 6.9 seconds, 0 to 60, that's still competitive with a cheaper ID4 or any of those cars that are swimming in that territory, and 7 seconds still feels very brisk when you're driving an EV. Talking Tesla and their chief designer, Franz van Holzhausen, providing an update on the ROADSTER now, according to Drive Tesla Canada. During a product roadmap update on the earnings call, Elon Musk didn't even mention the new Roadster, but on a podcast called Spike's Car Radio Podcast, Tesla's chief designer did say, "We're working on the Roadster. I wish it was working faster. I wish we were working faster, sorry. But I have to say that in the time that we've been developing it, we've been learning a lot. Like Plaid is a great learning platform. All those experiences will make its way back into a much better Roadster than we'd launched right after when we debuted it." I'll pop a link to that story in the show notes if you would like to read more. Coming soon, why Europe's power grid is ready to support 100 million EVs, and the Volkswagen Beetle being hinted at by VW's chief. Stick around. Those stories are coming up. They're on the way. Now let's talk about the Alibaba-backed robotaxi company AutoX. They've just reached 1,000 of their vehicles. I think they use Chrysler Pacifica minivans, the plug-in hybrids that do about 30 miles of electric range. They're a startup, and they've just made their 1,000th robotaxi, which is significant because in places in the US where it's allowed to do these tests, I think Waymo has 800 of them. According to this article, the company AutoX have their operation center in San Francisco, and reaching 1,000 autonomous vehicles is a real milestone. On December last year, they announced the completion of their production line based on the autonomous driving system, calling it the first dedicated level 4 production facility in China. They use a combination of LiDAR, radar, cameras, and a full sensor suite to achieve real level 4 robotaxi autonomy. I imagine they also use some HD mapping in there as well, but this article didn't mention that. We'll talk about Europe's power grid next, supporting over 100 million electric vehicles, according to a new study in E&T magazine, capable of that number. According to this EY and ELECTREK piece of research, which found that timely planning of charging infrastructure and coordination between public authorities is also needed. Things like the utilities, the grid, and charge point operators to prevent any kind of overloading of the grid. But we're ready for 100 million EVs, and after that, the grid will actually get stronger the more that EVs are on it. So what people don't, it's so counterintuitive, but you can either use electric vehicles as a big old energy store, and vehicle to grid, vehicle to load, etc., or you can ensure that the grid is used more evenly. So if we charge, and it's the same argument, if everybody with a petrol car turned up to fill up at the pumps at the same time, as we've seen with twice in my driving lifetime, once in 2001, around that time, and then one last year, again, queues at the petrol pumps, and the country grinds to a halt. Nobody can get fuel because everybody wants to get fuel at the same time because it causes panic buying. And that's the same with charging. If everyone gets home at 5 o'clock and plugs in their EV, of course we're going to have issues. But if you can incentivize people to charge overnight when it's cheaper and the grid is, less utilized, utilities have to build the grid out for the peak. Otherwise, you're going to get blackouts and brownouts, and you're going to get issues with people not being able to get access to electricity if you don't build a robust grid. So you build it for the peak. But if you can bring that peak down, and it means that overnight, when normally the grid is so underutilized that you can even out those peaks, it means that the investment is much more justified in the grid, and it actually helps. Anyway, like I say, it's kind of counterintuitive when you start doing the thinking about how EVs will help the power grids, and that's what this study is saying. Next, Volkswagen. The Beetle, the legendary name Beetle, could be making a return. It's been hinted at by their boss, Herbert Diess, talking on a Q&A session on Chinese social media last month. He confirmed they're considering bringing back the Beetle with electric power. And I quote, "I'm very excited about the launch of the ID Buzz, and from this experience, learn how we can bring our traditional and emotional world to the EV sector, thinking of the Beetle," Diess said, according to a report from the Spanish website Hybrids and Electrics and reported here by whichcar.com.au. Now, VW have registered e-Carmen, e-Kubel, e-Golf Classic and e-Beetle with the European Union almost 2 years ago, but I don't know, ID Beetle? The e-Beetle? What would it be called? Anyway, not even on the roadmap that we know of. BMW blog next, reporting that the BMW i4, the first model to get their new iDrive 8 software update. This gives some more functionality to the eSIM, but also it strengthens your mobile phone signal using the car's external antenna. Also, it helps out with smarter lane departure warning systems. And actually, when you're using the lane departure warning, it knows when the driver wants to return to the original lane after passing a vehicle on country roads and highways. In other words, says BMW blog, the BMW i4 will not issue a lane departure warning or pull the steering wheel when it knows you've done your overtaking manoeuvre and you're getting back into the original lane. It's one of my bugbears with systems that don't do that. So good. If you have an i4, then let me know if you've got that software update. Next, the British EV van maker Arrival prepares for its US debut, according to CityAM website. Arrival is preparing for its US debut in Charlotte, North Carolina, where their headquarters in the US are. Their new offices will open next month, and the production facilities for vans in Charlotte and one for buses in South Carolina later in the year. Now, Mike Abelson is head of Arrival's automotive division, and he said the market's becoming saturated with luxury EVs, but commercial vehicles, big opportunities. He says, "When I joined Arrival 2.5 years ago, nobody was too excited about electric last-mile delivery. Yet now, they seem to be all the rage." And they really are, actually. I mean, they were in like hardcore EV nerds like me 2.5 years ago when he joined Arrival. Yeah, we were excited about the opportunity of your Amazon delivery being done on electric power. But now that thinking has kind of gone far and wide, and lots of people are very excited about that. Let's talk about a highway trial, an e-highway trial in the UK could lead to new technology. According to this BBC article, it would see electric heavy goods vehicles recharging while they're driving using overhead wires like a tram or an electric train. Now, all the trains down here where I am on my line on the south coast use a third rail, but many of our trains here do have overhead wires, so could we do the same for trucking? If the study opens up the next stage, which would be a pilot scheme, 19 miles or 30 kilometres of a motorway in the northeast could be electrified for HGVs as a way for emissions to be reduced by trucks. Now, I loved the fact that the EV world has lots of innovation. We're always talking about what's latest, greatest, and people trying things. This idea is daft, but hey, if you want the good stuff, you've got to put up with some crazy ideas. It's a 9-month feasibility study in northeast Lincolnshire. Hey, batteries are getting bigger, charging's getting quicker. You want to put up not just 19 miles, but hundreds of thousands of miles of cables all over every country, and then maintain those cables just so that lorries can charge. Put the infrastructure somewhere, make the lorry go to the infrastructure, charge, and then leave, right? Don't put cables over every road in the country. Silly idea, but hey, like I say, you want the good ideas, occasionally, you got to kiss a frog every so often. If you want your PlayStations and Xboxes, occasionally, you got to have an Atari Jaguar or a Sega Saturn. Let's move on. US EV prices, the cheapest and the most expensive, have been charted by Inside EVs. And I love this because at the bottom end of the scale, hey, where I shop, Nissan Leaf remains the least expensive EV on the market, thanks to a price reduction last August. The entry-level Nissan Leaf, 40 kilowatt-hour battery. And if you don't do long journeys and you're not worried about rapid gating and heating up the battery when it can't cool itself down, this is a brilliant value car. Effectively $20,875 if the full federal tax credit applies to your financial situation. But even better than that, there'll be dealers with these on their lots that want to get shot of them. And so if you want a Leaf, you don't mind charging on CHAdeMO, you don't do tons of long journeys, and these cars can, but still fabulous value. Next up is the Mini Cooper SE, effectively 23,250, but 114 miles of range. Then there's the Leaf E Plus, 62 kilowatt-hour battery, bigger motor, and just $5,000 more than the cheaper Leaf. If you can afford it, go for this. Again, look out for deals at dealers. 226 miles of EPA range. It's such a cheap way of going electric motoring. Other end of the scale, because we like to dream, the top end is dominated by the Porsche Taycan family, Model S Plaid, Model X Plaid, Lucid Air, Audi RS e-tron GT, all the way over 120,000. Well, thank you so much for watching today. A long podcast, but I hope you don't mind. And let me know your feedback in the comments below about any of the stories that we talked about. Check out the audio version of this show, and if you have got a podcast app on your phone, tablet, computer, and you're not subscribed yet to this podcast, hey, look, you've got to the end of this show. So what are you waiting for? Open it up, search EV News Daily, hit subscribe, and then you've got the option. You can watch this show, you can listen to the audio when you're out and about. You'll have it both ways. And if you want to put this show on the air, you can be one of our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/EV News Daily. I'd really appreciate you having a look at that. It's how we fund this show. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.